You can think of HIPAA as being the government has this big regulatory stick, and if you don't abide by it, you're going to get beat over the head with it, and there's penalties and all of that stuff. You can look at it from the perspective of fear, or you can look at it from the perspective of opportunity.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Spotlight session. Today we have a recurring guest, Liam Degnan from the Compliancy Group. Liam, how you doing?
Doing good, Chase. Yeah, thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
It's really great to have you back.
Yeah, thank you. It is a pretty ripe 82 degrees right now where I am, and I have no air conditioning in this room, so it's been a little bit of a hot, stuffy day working from home, but otherwise doing great.
Well, you're looking pretty dry, so I think you're good so far.
Fortunately, yeah.
So Liam's going to talk to us about HIPAA compliance. Obviously, Liam was on the show a couple of months ago, and today we're going to really talk about leveraging HIPAA to your advantage, making more money off of being HIPAA compliant. But first, let's quickly talk about what that is for anybody who might be watching along who's not sure of what HIPAA compliance is. Do you want to give us a quick overview of that? Yeah,
so when we're talking about HIPAA compliance, and just to give an overall foundational idea, what the government requires as it concerns HIPAA, and there's lots of misunderstandings when it concerns compliance, what most people tend to think of is the security requirements of HIPAA, and obviously making sure that people's privacy and violations aren't happening and everything's being protected. What HIPAA really comes down to is a very specific set of annual requirements that need to be satisfied as part of what the government calls your effective compliance program, right? So things like conducting an annual risk assessment, implementing policies and procedures, staff trainings, right? Things like the specific agreements that are needed if there's vendors that you're working with. And so both for a practice and also for a digital marketer engaging with medical practices, all of these requirements, it kind of manifests themselves a little bit differently depending on who you are or what you do, just because what is effective for one business is not necessarily going to be effective for somebody else. But it's the overall program that you have in place to ensure that you are not only operating in a compliant way, but that that's documented and being maintained ongoing.
And we focus on the compliancy end, right? Because we want to be covered. But the whole goal of this is that people's health records are safe, right? Online. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really the end goal. And so once you start thinking, you become aware of, oh, wow, I didn't even know this existed. We better check into this. You then realize that it's a chain of compliancies that have to work together, right? So High Level worked with your company to make our software HIPAA compliant. So you can upgrade your High Level account to make everything within our software compliant. But then there's the chain from there, right? So there's your agency, and then there's the practice. And so your company can help our community as well get their agency compliant, and even the practice if they haven't taken those steps already on their end, correct?
Yep, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And so that's really important to understand. Like HIPAA compliance gets thrown around, but you really need to understand that the whole chain has to be compliant in order for everybody to be out of harm's way, let's say, should a problem arise. And Liam, we had talked about when we were preparing for this call, some other pieces of compliance that you need to think about, right? So when you're using High Level, in order to power your voice-related items, text messages, phone calls, voicemail drops, and your emails that go out, you're using third parties, right? And those third parties are outside of High Level and our compliance, right? So talk to me about Twilio.
Yeah, so there's tons of different third parties potentially that could be touching both your internal data and even potentially patient information, because everything, the HIPAA structure is designed to protect what's called PHI, okay? And PHI just stands for Protected Health Information. And what it is pretty much is any unique identifying information about a patient. Its name, email, phone number, address, whatever it is. And so a lot of the third parties that you integrate with, what the government is concerned with is not just that you have your own internal compliance structures in place. There's actually an entire one of the HIPAA rules, it's called the Omnibus rule, dedicated entirely to the way that you interact and the way that you operate with your third-party vendors. Now, there's no way necessarily of ensuring that every single vendor that you work with is HIPAA compliant. The government does not make anybody else responsible for anybody else's HIPAA compliance. What they do is they lay out a number of different guidelines in terms of how you can approach this, just to make sure that you are operating a way that limits your own liability. And that is, if there's a vendor like Twilio, and I know that there was a bunch of other folks that we mentioned previously.
Mailgun, we talked about.
Yeah, Mailgun, lots of these different folks. It's best to not kill yourself trying to figure out if everybody that you're working with is completely 100% HIPAA compliant, and just follow what the government's expectations are for you, right? Because what the government would expect of you in order for you to operate in a compliant way is that you have what's called a business associate agreement with that vendor that you're working with. And for a company like Twilio, this is very, very easy to execute, okay? And then what they also require is some type of what they call a due diligence, right? That you ask a series of questions just to make sure that that vendor is trustworthy, that they can actually handle that data. A lot of that predominantly is most important in the executing of that BAA, because all that does is it puts you in a position where now, let's say that you were engaging with a company like Twilio, okay? Twilio has a breach, okay? And that breach involved information about patients and practices that you are working with. If we're talking about that chain of compliance, right? So you are working with Twilio, who is actually handling information on a practice that is working with you. They don't necessarily know that you're working with Twilio or any other third parties are touching this information, depending on how in depth their understanding is of your business. So the government wants to just document and limit that chain as much as possible. Now, if Twilio has a breach and you don't have a business associate agreement in place with them, you are in essence responsible for the data that was compromised in that incident, and it can come back to you from a HIPAA perspective. By executing that BAA, it creates a firewall between you and the vendor that you're working with to ensure that they are responsible for their HIPAA compliance programs and the liabilities that they incur by handling that data. You are just responsible for yourself. Okay, so following those guidelines, both in just very simply vetting your vendors, making sure that they're trustworthy, then executing a BAA. One of the most fundamental ways from a HIPAA perspective that you can ensure that you are at least protecting yourself. You're not responsible for anybody else's compliance programs, not responsible for ensuring that anybody else is HIPAA compliant, but that you are responsible for ensuring that that agreement is in place just to protect yourself.
That's awesome. And so we had talked about like Mailgun and some of the other popular SMTP providers on the email side, and you did a little research and you came back and said, yep, it looks like Mailgun's happy to sign BAAs. There were a few of them that it didn't look like they were. So this is important information for high-level users when it comes to determining which SMTP provider you want to use if you work in the medical space, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And companies like Twilio, Mailgun, G Suite, all of them will more than likely sign a BAA, and there's even information on their websites about it. Companies that, there's other companies, it could be companies like SendGrid, okay? As far as I know, they're not willing to sign a BAA. Other ones like Send and Blue, not willing to sign a BAA. Now, you don't even need to go that many steps further in vetting those people, because generally speaking, if they're not comfortable with signing a BAA, their services are probably not compliant and they know it, which is why they're not willing to accept that liability in signing that agreement. So it's just something you have to be aware of if you're engaging with those vendors. Now,
this opens up the possibilities to leverage compliancy, right? And so by going through all of this, well, first of all, I want to put this out there because I feel like this can be really overwhelming. And if you're hearing this for the first time, it's like, oh my gosh, are we at a huge risk right now? How much work is this going to be? How much is it going to cost for us to make all this, compliance? And I think knowing that your company is there will bring a lot of solace to people, right? So people can engage your company. And I think before you talk about pricing, not only engage you to help their agency become compliant, but resell your services to their clients to help them become compliant, correct?
Yeah, so there's kind of two different aspects of this. So the way that the way that we would engage with the digital marketing agency is both, because we call it the analogy of like carrot versus stick, right? So you can think of HIPAA as being the government has this big regulatory stick, and if you don't abide by it, you're going to get beat over the head with it, and there's penalties and all of that stuff. You can look at it from the perspective of fear, or you can look at it from the perspective of opportunity, right? And so what happens is as an agency, okay, if you are able to operate within healthcare contexts in a way where you are not only fully compliant, but able to speak confidently about those things with your practices, it positions you so powerfully in the way that you are able to engage with that practice, because you're now speaking to them as somebody who understands their business, right? Somebody who understands the complexities of the things that they're dealing with. And even actually directly addressing, I'll tell you, for the number of medical practices that we work with, they are all terrified of ever engaging on any type of a social media platform, doing any type of an email, SMS marketing, because what they see is just risk. And so if you as a digital marketer can approach them, not just from the perspective of offering these services, but having actual subject matter expertise, knowing that you are yourself fully HIPAA compliant, being able to communicate that, and then also be able to assist them with their HIPAA compliance. It's not only something that can create additional revenue streams, it can actually just help you generate more leads, because what people are looking for is often not just a marketer, but somebody who can help them do that in a way that is HIPAA compliant, and somebody who has that expertise, which is not the easiest thing to find.
And that doesn't mean that you have to become an expert, right? If you hire the compliancy group, your company, I can just forward all my questions from my clients about HIPAA to you, right? If my client says, yes, please help us become compliant, we're happy to pay for that service. You charge, what is it, $2,500 a year or something?
Yep, $2,500 for the small practice.
$2,500 for a small practice. I can mark that up to Dr. Bob, $5,000 a year for us to be your HIPAA compliancy partner. Any questions I get about it from Dr. Bob, I just forward them over to you. You guys tell me what needs to be done. And I don't really have to become an expert at all. I can just feel confident that everything is being taken care of for me, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But then the other aspect of it is that when it comes to HIPAA, it doesn't take a whole lot. And just from what we've said on this webinar, I guarantee you, if you are listening to this right now, you know more about HIPAA probably than 75% of the doctors do that you work with, okay? Most of the healthcare industry knows so little about HIPAA that they will legitimately be blown away if you're able to actually speak to this from the perspective of having any knowledge on it, because most of them are clueless, okay? For every 16 practices that get audited by the OCR for a HIPAA violation, one passes. Okay, there's like a 94% failure rate in terms of government audits, because most of the small practices that are out there really do not know what they're doing, okay, when it comes to HIPAA. So you can think of it, you have us to provide that subject matter expertise, but also you really will gain your own expertise for yourself, because by engaging with us, we are going to walk you completely through the process of becoming HIPAA compliant for your business. So you can then speak to those practices from the perspective of firsthand experience rather than secondhand knowledge.
And of your clients who have been audited, how many of them have failed?
None. So we've been doing this for 15 years. We have clients in all 50 states. I think we're up to 35 or 36 countries internationally. We have over 200,000 users in the platform. We have never had a client fail any type of a HIPAA audit, investigation, or be fined in the history of our company.
That's fantastic. So you mentioned other countries, and we actually have a question about Canada. I thought HIPAA was an American thing. Does this apply to other countries?
So it absolutely is. It's a United States regulation, but what happens is, so let's say a company like yourself, Chase. So you have a company like High Level that maybe is not based in the US, it might be based in Canada, or it might be based in Europe, but they are trying to broaden out their client base to working with United States practices. So we have tons of software companies that are outside of the US that are engaging with United States medical practices or medical agencies. And because of that information that they're receiving, they are now responsible to be HIPAA compliant as well.
Makes total sense. Gotcha. And so if I'm hearing this, I'm like, wow, this is awesome. Okay, so I can get you on my side. It's going to alleviate any stress or worries about, figuring this all out. Well, now I can go, like you said, on the offensive, and I can start reaching out to potential clients and saying, hey, I know I talked to you last month and you were happy because you already had a marketing service. Do you know if they're really compliant? Are they protecting you? And start asking questions that could woo you business away from people who have not even thought about this, who are putting that practice at risk unknowingly or maybe knowingly, and generate more business by separating yourself from your competitors, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And along that side, we have pre-built campaigns that if people are trying to market out a little bit more broadly to medical entities, and if you're partnered with us, the stuff that we're happy to provide you with, even just to give you some fuel for the fire and some ideas to send out and do your own type of marketing if you're looking to pursue medical.
I mean, when you said that 9 out of 10 companies who are audited fail, all I need to know is how much these companies are paying on average, and that is enough to really get somebody thinking about compliance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So Liam, we have some questions here. If you don't mind doing a little Q&A.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody says the biggest question is Twilio, $15,000 for them to sign a BAA. I have no idea if that's true or not. Have you heard what it costs to get a BAA from Twilio?
That I would be completely clueless on. So things like that, you would want to take it up directly with Twilio. It shouldn't cost. Getting a BAA should not cost anything. What may be additional sometimes is if Twilio has a regular platform, and then they have a platform that is HIPAA compliant on top of it, right?
Like high level, right? You have to go up and pay $297 more a month.
From the perspective of how much it costs, you want to take that up with them directly. That I would not be familiar with.
Gotcha. Okay, so we had another question about the list of email SMTP providers who do sign BAAs. So I think the only ones we came across in our research were Google, right? G Suite, Mailgun, and were those the only two?
Yeah, I mean, there may be others that I am not aware of, but certainly it's not usually that difficult to find out if the SMTP provider would sign a BAA, because they usually have something about it right on their website. So there's specific people that you're looking to work with, fill out a contact form and just ask the question. They'll usually just let you know, and it's usually yes, we'll sign a BAA, or no, we don't. Because very, very, very rarely will there be a company that's kind of gray on that. They usually know whether they are or they aren't. And then so it's not terribly complicated.
So basically, if you want to use a specific provider that we haven't talked about here, just Google their name and HIPAA BAA, and if they will sign a BAA, you'll probably find a page pretty quickly on their site. If you can't find anything, they probably are not HIPAA compliant, and therefore are not willing to sign BAAs.
Or just that even,
open a ticket or whatever you need to do. Mark, realistically, how many companies who fail get fined?
So to put this into perspective, the smallest HIPAA fine ever levied was on a dental practice, okay, for the way that they replied to a Yelp review, okay? And in their reply to a Yelp review, they confirmed the identity of that patient and confirmed that they visited the practice. They were fined $10,000 for that. Now, in the event of a monetary penalty, the fine will usually be pretty severe, but much of the time it's not actually a monetary penalty. It's an actual settlement in which that practice is now put in a position where on a monthly or a quarterly basis, they have to report on their compliance. They have to do X number of things in response to the settlement with the OCR that leads to a follow-up and monitoring over the course of 3 years, in which then they get reevaluated. A lot of people that go through that process wind up getting fined at the end of it if they still are not able to get their act together. So the biggest risk is not even necessarily a monetary fine. It's really reputational, and this just because if there's an investigation by the OCR, it's all public record. If you Google OCR wall of shame, and that you can actually filter this, it's a legitimate U.S. government portal where public record, you can see breaches that practices have had of more than 500 patients. It's called a meaningful breach. All of it is public record. You might see a couple folks in your own town. So definitely would check that out. And a lot of the times it's not a monetary penalty, but what they're really facing is liability. Because if I'm a patient and I'm getting breached, I want compensation for that, right? And then also reputational, because what you don't want the first thing to come up when somebody Googles your practice is the HHS wall of shame, talking about how you had a breach of more than 500 of your patients and that type of stuff. That's really where for a small practice, that's where the biggest risk is. Interesting.
So somebody said, I heard they start at Twilio starts at 15,000 to scare you, but it ends up being 1,100 per month. So it sounds like there's a lot of hearsay about what Twilio charges. I don't know what they charge. Now I'm very curious myself, but I know that the higher the number is, in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, the more of an advantage I'm going to have, because when I become compliant, I can then again go to my potential clients and be like, ask your agency on record for the BAA between them and Twilio. And if they don't have one, you're at risk. You should come work with us because we are compliant. I can provide you with all of that. We can help you become compliant. You do not want to end up on the wall of shame, paying fines and being in detention for 3 years. So very interesting stuff here. Cool. Let me see if we have any other questions in Facebook. No, I think that's all of them. So Liam, you mentioned that you have materials that you could share with our community that they might be able to use for marketing as far as outreach and trying to generate more potential business. Where could people go? How can they connect with you to get that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, if you'd be interested in learning more about what we do, everything, our full service, okay, it's all, if you're engaging with us to become compliant, everything that we do will be all inclusive under that, okay? So if you'd be interested in learning more, seeing some of those materials, even seeing a demo of the product, whatever it is, would be more than happy. You can shoot me an email, you can give me a call, whatever you like. I'm more than happy to help.
And what's the website? Where can people go to find your contact info?
It's you can go to, I mean, technically it's compliancygroup.com. You won't find my contact information on there directly, but you can email me. It's just liam@compliancygroup.com.
Fantastic. Lastly, let's bring it back to the context of the crazy situation we're in with COVID. I know we all heard a lot about things being relaxed because of COVID. Where are we at with that? What do we need to know?
So it's a complete misunderstanding, okay, in the way that people interpret the way that the government announced a lot of these things. There was essentially 3 things that were announced by the government from the perspective of Health and Human Services, and they all exclusively apply to telehealth services, okay? This does not mean that a practice does not need to be HIPAA compliant. This does not mean that HIPAA enforcement is being relaxed. What it said in the press release that the government put out, and even words from President Trump, okay, number 1, if you are a practice and you are providing telehealth services to your patients, and by really just video conferencing services, virtual meetings, whatever it is, you are now allowed, for the time being, you're allowed to use platforms that are not compliant to do that. So if you're using Google Hangouts, if it's Skype, if it's Facebook, for the time being, the government said, however you want to interact with your patients, it is a-okay, because they don't want to create too extensive of a limitation. You want to be careful in the way that you explain that if people are asking you questions about it, because there still is risk involved. So even, some of you may have heard Zoom had a breach for the people that were using their free version, like private sessions with patients. Those interactions with their patients were actually being compromised because they were not paying for the secure platform, right? So you still want to be careful, but the government said for the time being, we're not going to enforce it if you want to use a platform that is not necessarily quote unquote HIPAA compliant. The second thing that they said is that you can actually now bill insurance if you're providing telehealth services. And so there was a relaxation of the ways in which a practice could actually bill their insurance specifically Medicare when they were providing telehealth services to a patient. Everything else from a HIPAA perspective stayed exactly the same. So they're still fully responsible for having a compliance program in place. They're still fully responsible for ensuring that they're protecting their patients' information. But in the realm of, as long as there is a good faith effort involved and they're not intentionally trying to be negligent, the government has permitted them to use platforms that maybe are not completely compliant to provide those services during this time.
Cool. So you're allowed to use Zoom, but basically nothing else has changed, right? So I think there was a lot of misinformation of like, hey, HIPAA's on pause. Like, we don't have to worry about it for now, which it sounds like it's completely untrue. Okay, awesome. So let me ask you one last question, because I've seen it come up a couple of times, and I think this is a question that everybody has in general. When it comes to marketing and lead generation, if I'm running an ad to a landing page where I'm asking you for a name, an email, and a phone number, when does that become public health information? Like, if I'm just catching your name, email, phone, do I have to be HIPAA compliant right now? Or like, when does it become a health record?
So first of all, it depends. So if it's somebody filling out like a lead form, the risk comes in the sense that that person may not be a patient yet of the practice, in which it's not PHI, it's not covered under HIPAA, but as soon as they become a patient of that practice, it is PHI, right? Because now they're a patient, right? And so even things, and I can show you, I'm just gonna get this open real quick, if that's okay, Chase, to show just the actual 18 identifiers of what the government considers to be PHI. Let me share my screen quick if I could. I'm going to share this window.
Yeah, no, take your time. I think people are going to love this because this is a very common question.
Okay, so this is a little bit of an infographic that we made just from the perspective of making it very, very clear what is considered PHI and what is not. Now, these guidelines, this is what comes from the OCR, okay, in terms of the 18 identifiers of PHI. First two things on the list is name and address. Then any dates, right? So date of birth, date that the person requested, it could be date that the person visited the practice, date that they requested their medical records, right? Their phone number, an email address, right? PHI is not medical or treatment related information, okay? It is any unique identifying information about a patient. So even in terms of address, anything more specific than state, so even just the town that somebody comes from is considered PHI because of where it's coming from, right? So this is actually a great infographic even to use in your own interactions with people, just again, in the realm of showing people what is and what is not covered under HIPAA. So anybody that wants that, I'd be happy to send that, and I could even throw that to you, Chase, so that people have this if they want it. But
yeah, that would be great. So what you're saying here is those things, irrespective of the other items, individual pieces are all PHI. You're not saying once I have all of this information, okay, now it's PHI. You're saying if you have any of this information, it's PHI.
Yeah, so if you have,
interesting.
If you have a name of a patient and that's being shared to you by a doctor or being put in a lead form, they're a patient of that practice, totally PHI.
Wow, okay, so basically any information you generate, and then as soon as they become a patient and you're storing that information back when you caught the lead, you're storing PHI.
You want to, that's why you want to be doing it in a HIPAA compliant way to begin with, because otherwise, you are then responsible for tracking if that person actually becomes a patient. If they don't, or if people could be filling out those forms that are patients, you don't know the level of data that your practices are sharing with you. It's worth addressing.
All sorts of things are coming to mind. If you're running a Zap that pushes the data out to a Google Sheet because you want to store it in 2 places, now you've opened up another area of risk, because depending on where you're storing that information and where that sheet is hosted. So all sorts of things to think about. Zapier, great question. I don't know if Zapier is compliant. I don't even know if Zapier stores data. They might just pass it in an encrypted fashion. So great question, Mark. That would be something to check at the Zapier level. So again, all sorts of things to think about. And again, me, if I'm a marketing agency, if I have an agency, I'm thinking, okay, all the more reason to have a partner on our side. And when I learned about your pricing, honestly, I was like, wow, that's way more affordable than I thought. And the fact that I can mark it up is fantastic. And again, the more complex this becomes, the more leverage I'm going to have against my competitors, because it's harder for them to do this without someone like you to guide them. And now you become in a position where you're like, look, this is what it really is. Here's all the documentation for us. Show us what you have over there with these other people you're working with. And if it's nothing, well, now I really look like the authority, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, it's about building trust, right? Is what it's really all about. Because even from the perspective of you could be HIPAA compliant. I think the advantages to having somebody like us backing you is the fact that if we are the ones handling the compliance with the client, you're not accepting any liability, right? Because what you don't want to be doing is consulting your clients in something that you may or may not be 100% solid about, and then be accepting liability for that. So we essentially allow you to provide those services without accepting any of that liability on yourself. And then the other aspect of it is that we'll not only help you become compliant, but really the way that it works is if you were to resell it, we'll sell you those licenses. So if it's $2,500 for us to help you become compliant using our software and working with one of our coaches, to resell, we actually give you a discount on those licenses that you can mark up. So it wouldn't be $2,500. Oh, nice. You could buy licenses from us for $2,000 and then resell it to your clients for whatever you want. So for we give you lots of different options there.
That's awesome. So Mark, another question. That's correct. As an agency, you would need to become HIPAA compliant also, not just your clients. It's a chain of client, your agency, software. So high level compliant. You can go to HIPAA compliant in the marketplace and we're covered. Now let's talk about ancillary software. Twilio, SMTP, right? You also need to be thinking about these, getting BAAs from them. And again, the compliancy group can help you through that process of what to ask and what to get. But it's a whole world of compliance that all ties together. So you really need, if you're working with medical, you really need to think strongly about this and make sure that you're in a good position and not putting your agency at risk. And again, the one thing I'll reiterate is most of the medical practitioners that I worked with at our old agency are fully aware that HIPAA compliance costs money. They are fully prepared to pay more for any given service if it has the HIPAA compliant option, because this is all about risk mitigation, right? So, yeah, so I was just reading a comment here. I think go needs to be bottom BA for Twilio to let us know, possibly a group discount for all the users. Yeah, Mark, this is a great question. I mean, we need to go to Twilio and see what their stance is, what their pricing is, and maybe there is a way that we could all come together and get some sort of group buying power from them. So yeah, good thought. Yeah. All right, Liam, thanks so much for coming back on the show. I think we really need to do these like once a quarter just to make sure that everybody's aware, everybody in the community is protected, or at least aware of the risk that they're taking if they're not.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. I genuinely appreciate it. Love joining. I love just the casual discussion and Q&A. So it's always a good time.
Okay, so again, the URL is compliancygroup.com or thecompliancygroup.com?
So it's compliancygroup.com. If you put it in without the hyphen, it actually will still come up. I saw Mark just sent that in. But compliancygroup.com, I'll actually type a message. Let me just give me 1 second. I just typed a message in with my email, okay? And then
okay, and I'll go copy paste this over into the Facebook conversation.
Yeah, and then my number. If you want to just reach out to me via phone, you can contact me there.
All right, awesome. Let me pass this over really quickly into the comments here. And that URL was good without the hyphen, you said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just sent my email as well.
Awesome. All right, I just posted that over in the Facebook group. Thanks for coming back on the show. Thanks everybody for watching. We will see you next week in another episode. Have a good one, everyone.
Have a great day, guys. Thank you.
Bye.